What sin is so profound that it cannot be forgiven, even in death? What transgression is so vile that the earth itself refuses to grant you peace and heaven forever locks its gates? In the pantheon of folklore, there exist punishments born from the deepest fears of humanity. But few are as visceral, as agonizingly personal, as the curse that transforms a woman not into a ghost, but into a monster of fire and flesh. A creature condemned to gallop through the darkness with a pillar of flame where her head should be. This is not just a ghost story. This is the terrifying truth behind the Headless Mule. The year is 1750. The air in the mountainous spine of colonial Brazil is thick enough to drink, heavy with the scent of damp earth, sweet decay, and the distant, metallic tang of immense wealth. This is Minas Gerais, the general mines, the heart of the Brazilian gold rush. By night, the jungle reclaims what the day has stolen. The cacophony of insects is a living wall of sound, and the darkness is absolute, broken only by the cold, indifferent light of a sliver of moon. For a man named Afonso, a lone tropero, guiding a train of mules laden with supplies, this darkness is a familiar, if unwelcome, companion. His hands, calloused and stained from years of gripping leather reins, rest easy. His face, weathered by 1,000 storms, is turned towards the narrow, treacherous path carved into the mountainside. The hooves of his animals are a steady, hypnotic rhythm against the mud and stone, a sound of progress, a sound of survival. Tonight, however, the rhythm is wrong. The air, usually alive with the rustle of unseen creatures, has fallen unnaturally silent. Even the deafening chorus of the cicadas has ceased, as if a great predator is near. Afonso feels a primal chill crawl up his spine, a cold sweat beading on his brow despite the oppressive humidity. His lead mule, a stubborn but reliable beast named Valente, suddenly stops. Its ears twitch, flat against its skull, and a low, guttural snort escapes its nostrils. Afonso pulls on the reins. "Vamos, Valente," he mutters, his voice a dry whisper. The animal refuses, its powerful body trembling, its eyes wide with a terror he cannot see. He squints into the oppressive dark ahead. There is nothing but the wall of black jungle. Then he hears it. It's faint at first, almost lost beneath the pounding of his own heart. The sound of hoofbeats. But these are not the familiar plodding steps of a pack mule. These are frantic, desperate, and heavy. They strike the earth with a percussive violence, a galloping thunder that seems to come from everywhere at once. It's too fast for this treacherous terrain, suicidal even for the most experienced rider. Afonso's hand instinctively goes to the hilt of the rusty machete at his hip. Bandits were common on these gold roads, but they were men of ambush and stealth, not thunderous cavalry charges. This is something else. The sound grows louder, closer. It's accompanied now by a new noise, a horrifying, guttural braying that is half scream, half sob. It is a sound of pure, undiluted agony, a vocalization of pain so profound that the hairs on Afonso's arms stand on end. He has heard animals die before, but this is the sound of a soul being torn apart. A strange flickering light begins to pulse deep within the woods, just off the path. It's a weak orange glow, like a distant torch. But it moves with the impossible speed of the hoofbeats, darting between ancient trees. A smell hits him next, acrid and vile, the stench of sulfur and burning hair. Valente screams, a high-pitched sound of pure panic, and rears back, breaking the train. The other mules scatter, their terrified cries swallowed by the jungle. Afonso is thrown from his saddle, landing hard in the cold, wet mud. Scrambling to his feet, he draws his machete, its blade a thin line of silver in the gloom. He is alone. The galloping is deafening now. The braying shatters the air around him, and then it bursts from the trees onto the path ahead. Afonso's mind refuses to process what his eyes are seeing. It is a mule, larger than any he has ever witnessed. Its powerful legs churn the earth, iron-shod hooves striking sparks from the stones. But it is the head, or the horrifying absence of one, that shatters his sanity. Where a head should be, a geyser of brilliant, roaring fire erupts from a ragged stump of a neck. The flames writhe and twist, casting flickering, demonic shadows across the path. Within the inferno, he can almost see the suggestion of screaming eyes and a gaping mouth, features of a woman locked in an eternal scream. Sparks and embers rain down from the fiery mane, hissing as they hit the damp ground. Valente screams, a high-pitched sound of pure panic, and rears back, breaking the train. The other mules scatter, their terrified cries swallowed by the jungle. Afonso is thrown from his saddle, landing hard in the cold, wet mud. Scrambling to his feet, he draws his machete, its blade a thin line of silver in the gloom. He is alone. The galloping is deafening now. The braying shatters the air around him, and then it bursts from the trees onto the path ahead. Afonso's mind refuses to process what his eyes are seeing. It is a mule, larger than any he has ever witnessed, its coat the color of soot and shadow. Its powerful legs churn the earth, iron-shod hooves striking sparks from the stones. But it is the head, or the horrifying absence of one, that shatters his sanity. Where a head should be, a geyser of brilliant, roaring fire erupts from a ragged stump of a neck. The flames writhe and twist, casting flickering, demonic shadows across the path. Within the inferno, he can almost see the suggestion of screaming eyes and a gaping mouth, features of a woman locked in an eternal scream. Sparks and embers rain down from the fiery mane, hissing as they hit the damp ground. This is the creature of whispers, the legend told in hushed tones by terrified miners and God-fearing priests. The Mula Sem Cabeza. It thunders towards him, a vision of damnation. He is frozen, mesmerized by the sheer impossible of it. The heat from its flaming neck washes over him, a physical blast that feels like standing at the gates of hell. He can see the glint of a rusted iron bridle embedded in the flesh around its mouthless, fiery visage. The stories are true. He screams, a pathetic, choked sound. He turns to run, but there is nowhere to go. The creature is upon him. It does not slow. It does not deviate. It gallops through him. For an instant, a feeling of unbearable searing cold, a void that extinguishes the very essence of his being. It is not the burn of fire, but the chill of utter damnation. His soul feels scoured, his sins laid bare. Then the monstrous form is past him, its agonizing bray echoing as it vanishes down the mountain path. Afonso collapses, his body trembling uncontrollably. He lies in the mud, gasping for air that refuses to fill his lungs. The phantom image of the fiery head burned forever behind his eyes. He survived. But as he lies there, listening to the jungle slowly, cautiously returning to life, he knows that a part of him will never leave this dark road. He has looked upon a soul condemned, and in its fiery torment, he saw the terrifying power of a curse made real. The image is seared into the mind, a headless rider galloping through the night. It is an archetype of terror that resonates across cultures and centuries. But the headless mule of Brazil is not alone in the pantheon of the decapitated. To truly understand the unique horror of this legend, we must first look at its spectral cousins, for in their similarities, and more importantly, their differences, we find the chilling foundation of the Brazilian curse. Across the Atlantic, on the mist-shrouded lanes of rural Ireland, another headless phantom rides. They call him the Dullahan. He is no mere ghost. He is a harbinger of death, an embodiment of the end. The Dullahan rides a magnificent black charger, and under his arm he carries his own severed head. Its flesh is decayed and moldy like old cheese, and a hideous, unnatural grin is stretched from ear to ear. Its eyes, small and black, dart about unceasingly, capable of seeing across the countryside even on the blackest of nights. When the Dullahan rides, all locks spring open and all gates fly apart. He is on a mission, a singular, grim purpose: to claim a soul. He wields a whip fashioned from a human spine, and where he stops, a mortal dies. He calls out the name of his victim, and in that moment, their soul is ripped from their body. There is no bargaining with the Dullahan, no escape. He is a force of nature, as inevitable and as merciless as death itself. His headless state represents the finality of the grave, a stark, visual reminder that life has been violently severed. This figure of the otherworldly collector of souls journeyed across the ocean, its essence seeping into the folklore of the New World. In America, it found its most famous form in the quiet, haunted glens of New York. Here, the specter is not an ancient fairy, but the ghost of a Hessian soldier, a mercenary who fought for the British during the Revolutionary War. The story tells of a man whose head was brutally severed by a cannonball in battle. He is forever searching for it, galloping through the night, a terrifying memento of the violence that birthed a nation. This is the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow, immortalized by the writer Washington Irving. He is a ghost of war, a symbol of a violent past that refuses to stay buried. His rage is that of a soldier denied a proper death. His purpose, a frantic, unending search. He is a phantom, a memory given terrifying form. When he pursues the hapless schoolmaster Ichabod Crane, it is a chase between the living and the dead, a ghost haunting the territory where he fell. Both the Dullahan and the Headless Horseman are powerful, terrifying figures. They represent external forces of death and history, specters whose origins lie in violence and the supernatural order of life and death. They are things that happen to you. And it is here, in this crucial distinction, that the true, deeper horror of the Mula Sem Cabeça reveals itself. The Brazilian legend is not a story about a fairy of death or the ghost of a soldier. It is not an external force. It is a story of internal damnation. The Headless Mule is not a separate entity. It is what a human becomes. The creature that galloped past Afonso on that dark mountain road was not born a monster. According to the legend, she was once a woman. Her crime was not fighting in a war or serving a supernatural master. Her sin, in the eyes of the deeply religious society that spawned the tale, was desire. Specifically, carnal love with a priest, a man sworn to God. This transgression against the sacred, this act of forbidden passion, is what triggers the curse. This is not a story about a ghost searching for its head. It is a story about a woman who loses her very humanity as punishment. On the night between Thursday and Friday, she undergoes a horrifying metamorphosis. Her body contorts, her bones reshape, and she transforms into a beast of burden. Her head, the vessel of her identity and reason, is consumed by a pillar of divine avenging fire. Unlike the Dullahan, she does not carry her head. It is replaced by a monument to her sin. Unlike the horseman, she is not a ghost of the past. She is a living, suffering being trapped in a weekly cycle of torment. Her frantic galloping is not a search, but a desperate, mindless flight from her own agony. Her terrifying bray is not a threat, but the scream of a soul trapped between human consciousness and monstrous form. The horror of the Mulasem Cabeza is not that it will kill you, though it often does, trampling anyone in its path. The true horror is the chilling suggestion of what you or anyone could become. It is a theological terror, born from the conviction that certain sins are so profound they strip you of your place in God's creation, turning you into a cautionary tale written in fire and flesh. This shifts the narrative from a simple monster hunt to a deeply unsettling exploration of faith, fear, and punishment. The headless figures of Ireland and America are phantoms to be feared and escaped. The headless mule of Brazil is a fate to be contemplated with dreadful reverence. To understand the fire that burns where a head should be, we must first understand the world that lit the match. A world of unimaginable wealth, zealous faith, and forbidden desire, simmering in the isolated mountains of colonial Brazil. For it was in this crucible of gold and God that one of the most terrifying and unique legends in the world was forged. A legend that tells us that the greatest monsters are not the ones that come for us in the night, but the ones we are told we can become. The story of the Mulasem Cabeza is more than just a folktale. It's a window into the soul of a nation, a complex tapestry of history, religion, and the untamable wilderness. The origins of this curse are buried deep in the soil of a bygone era, watered by the confluence of European beliefs and the harsh realities of a new frontier. Let's travel back to that time, the early 18th century. Portugal has discovered a motherlode in its vast South American colony. Gold. More gold than the Old World had ever seen. This discovery ignites a fever that reshapes the continent. Thousands of colonists, adventurers, and enslaved Africans are funneled into the rugged, unforgiving interior of Minas Gerais. Small, isolated towns spring up overnight, clinging to hillsides, their very existence revolving around the glittering metal being torn from the earth. Life here is a study in contrasts. By day, the clanging of picks against rock and the shouts of overseers fill the air. Fortunes are made and lost in the blink of an eye. Churches are built, cathedrals so laden with gold leaf that their interiors seem to bleed sunlight. This is a society of immense, ostentatious wealth, a society that displays its piety with the same fervor it displays its riches.
But by night, this world of order and ambition shrinks. The towns are small islands of light in an ocean of impenetrable darkness. The wilderness is vast and it is old. It holds secrets and dangers that the colonists' European sensibilities can barely comprehend. Panthers, giant serpents, and indigenous tribes who view the invaders with hostile eyes are the physical threats. But it is the unseen threats that truly terrify. In this isolation, faith becomes both a shield and a weapon. The Catholic Church is the absolute center of life, its doctrines providing the moral and social framework for everything. The priest is the most powerful figure in town, the direct intermediary between the mortal and the divine. His word is law, and the fear of God and of eternal damnation is a constant, palpable presence. Sin is not an abstract concept. It is a spiritual disease, a corruption that can invite real, tangible evil into the world. The colonists brought their own folklore with them from Portugal and Spain. Tales of werewolves, lobisomens, cursed souls, and demonic beings. These stories were transplanted into the Brazilian soil, where they mingled with the beliefs of the enslaved African population and the cosmology of the native peoples. The result was a new, uniquely Brazilian mythology, darker, stranger, and more primal than its European ancestors. It is in this fertile ground of fear and faith that the legend of the Headless Mule takes root. The story is a perfect storm of the culture's deepest anxieties. Let's deconstruct its core elements. First, the protagonist of the curse, the woman. In the rigid patriarchal society of colonial Brazil, a woman's virtue was her most valuable asset. Her identity was defined by her relationship to men, as a daughter, a wife, a mother. A woman who expressed her own desire, especially a desire that transgressed social and religious norms, was seen as a dangerous and destabilizing force. She was a vessel for temptation, a potential gateway for sin. Second, the object of her desire, the priest. This is the linchpin of the legend's power. The priest is supposed to be celibate, a man married to God. He is untouchable, a living symbol of divine authority. A carnal relationship with him is not merely adultery, it is a profound act of blasphemy. It is a sacrilege that defiles the sacred, challenging the very order of the universe as these people understood it. It is a sin against God Himself, committed with God's chosen representative. The severity of the crime demands a punishment of equal, supernatural magnitude. And so the curse is forged. It is a masterpiece of psychological and theological horror, tailored specifically to the fears of the time. The transformation into a mule is not random. The mule, an animal of burden, was the backbone of the colonial economy. It was a sterile, sexless creature, known for its stubbornness and its suffering. For a woman guilty of a sin of passion to be transformed into a sexless beast of burden is a chillingly symbolic form of divine retribution. Her humanity, defined by her potential as a wife and mother, is stripped away and replaced with the identity of a working animal. The iron bridle and shoes are another critical detail. In many versions of the tale, these must be placed on the woman before her transformation is complete. This suggests an element of ritual, a harnessing of this divine punishment. But more terrifyingly, it symbolizes her complete and utter subjugation. She is not just an animal, she is property, branded and controlled, her will entirely subsumed by the agony of the curse. And then there is the fire. Fire is a deeply dualistic symbol in Catholicism. It is the holy fire of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, a symbol of divine presence and purification. But it is also the unholy fire of hell, the instrument of eternal damnation. In the Mula Sem Cabeza, this duality is made terrifyingly manifest. The fire that replaces her head is a perversion of the divine flame. It is a holy fire turned into an instrument of torture, a crown of damnation. It burns away her face, her identity, her ability to speak or reason, leaving only a beacon of her sin for all to see in the terrifying darkness of the Brazilian night. Her punishment is to become a living, breathing vision of hell on earth. The gallop of the Headless Mule is a sprint towards oblivion, but it is a race that is never won. Every week, the cycle of torment begins anew. It starts not with fire and screams, but with a quiet, creeping dread. Imagine a woman living in one of these small, devout towns. To her neighbors, she is a widow, a seamstress, a baker's wife. She attends Mass, her head covered by a veil, her lips moving in silent prayer. But as Thursday's sun begins to bleed across the horizon, a cold sickness takes root in her gut. Every shadow seems to lengthen. Every toll of the church bell sounds like a judgment. She is not merely afraid of a monster. She is afraid of the monster within. As night falls, the change begins. It is an agony that defies description, a divine punishment enacted on a biological level. It often starts with a fever, a burning heat that spreads from her core, followed by violent, uncontrollable shudders. Her bones begin to ache, then to shift. The sounds are sickening, the wet pop of joints dislocating, the grating crack of bone elongating and thickening. Her human form, the body that once knew passion and love, is grotesquely unmade. Her spine curves and lengthens, forcing her onto all fours. Her skin toughens, thickening into a coarse, dark hide. Her fingers and toes fuse together, hardening into the solid, unforgiving form of a hoof. The pain is absolute, a white-hot symphony of suffering that erases all thought. And then comes the final, most horrific stage of the metamorphosis. Her head, the very seat of her soul and identity, begins to burn. From the inside out. There is no scream, for her vocal cords are already melting away. There is only the all-consuming fire of her sin, a holy flame turned into an instrument of hellish erasure. It bursts forth from her neck, not as a beacon, but as a brand, cauterizing her from humanity. Her punishment is to become a living, breathing vision on earth.
It is a mindless, desperate flight from a torment it cannot comprehend. Its path is one of chaos and terror. It thunders through sleeping towns, its iron-shod hooves striking sparks against the cobblestones, a sound that sends pious families scrambling to bar their doors and clutch their rosaries. It tramples through plantations, its fiery mane setting crops ablaze. Fences are shattered, livestock scattered. The creature's journey is punctuated by that horrifying, guttural bray, the only voice it has left, a sound that communicates nothing but pure animalistic suffering. To encounter the mule is to risk not just life, but sanity. The stories passed down through generations are filled with accounts of lone travelers and late-night wanderers who crossed its path. Most are found trampled, their bodies broken, their faces frozen in masks of terror. But some survive. They speak of the unnatural cold that precedes its arrival, the smell of sulfur, and the paralyzing fear that grips you as you witness the impossible sight of a creature crowned in flame. They say that if you look into its fire, you do not see a simple blaze. You see a vision of your own sins, a horrifying glimpse into the damnation that could await you. Yet, even in a curse this absolute, folklore provides a sliver of hope, a set of rules for the brave or foolish who would dare to confront the beast. The curse of the headless mule can be broken. But the methods are steeped in symbolism and demand almost superhuman courage. The most common method is to spill its blood. A single drop, shed by a sharp object, is said to be enough to shatter the enchantment. Imagine the scene. A man, perhaps a brave sertanejo, armed with nothing but a knife or a goad, standing his ground as this flaming demon of the night bears down on him. He cannot falter. He must strike true, piercing the tough, magical hide to draw that single, crucial drop. If he succeeds, the creature collapses, the fire is extinguished, and the curse is lifted forever. But if he fails, if his nerve breaks for even a second, he will be trampled into the dust, another victim of the phantom rider. Another, perhaps more intimate and terrifying method is to remove the iron bridle. The legends say that this bridle is the very anchor of the curse, the physical manifestation of the woman's enslavement to her punishment. To remove it, one must leap onto the back of the galloping beast, wrestling with a creature of supernatural strength and agony, all while being scorched by the heat of its fiery neck. One must reach into that impossible flame and unbuckle the iron harness. It is a trial by fire in the most literal sense, an act that requires not just bravery, but a form of madness. If the bridle is removed, the effect is instantaneous. The mule rears one last time, a final agonizing scream echoing from its fiery throat before it collapses to the ground. The fire vanishes, and in its place the human woman reappears, naked, weeping, and covered in blood and soot. She has no memory of the night's events, only a vague, dreamlike sense of profound suffering and a shame that will haunt her for the rest of her days. She is human again, but she is forever marked by the ordeal. The man who saved her is bound by a strict code of silence. He must never speak of her identity, lest the curse return, perhaps even claiming him as its next victim. This possibility of redemption, of breaking the cycle, adds a powerful layer of tragedy to the myth. It suggests that the damnation, while horrifying, might not be eternal. But the price of that redemption is a direct, physical confrontation with the divine punishment itself. When the sun rises, the curse recedes for another week. If the mule has not been freed, its rampage simply ends. The first rays of dawn are like a splash of holy water. The fire on its neck sputters and dies, and the monstrous form collapses in exhaustion. The transformation reverses, the painful process of unmaking, now remaking the human form. The woman is left wherever the dawn finds her, in a field, a ditch, deep in the jungle, naked, wounded, and with no clear memory of how she got there. She is forced to return to her life, to her town, carrying the secret physical and spiritual scars of her ordeal, knowing that in 7 days the dread will begin again. But a story this specific, this cruel, and this widespread does not arise from nothing. A legend of this power is more than just a scary tale to tell around a fire. It is a tool. It serves a purpose. The Headless Mule was not just a monster that haunted the Brazilian night. It was a guardian of social and religious order. A terrifying piece of cultural programming designed to enforce a strict moral code. Its primary function was the control of female sexuality. In the world of colonial Brazil, the Church's doctrine was absolute. Passion was a sin, lust a doorway for the devil. For a woman whose role was to be pious and submissive, to engage in a forbidden affair was to threaten the very fabric of society. The legend of the Headless Mule was the ultimate cautionary tale. It took the abstract concept of damnation and made it terrifyingly concrete. The message was brutally clear. This is what happens to women who follow their desires instead of God's law. This monstrous, agonizing fate is the price of transgression. It was a story told by mothers to daughters, by priests from the pulpit, a specter of fear used to enforce chastity and obedience. It was also a stark warning to the clergy. The curse is triggered by a sin that requires 2 participants. The priest, the man of God who breaks his sacred vow of celibacy, is as guilty as the woman. While he does not transform, he is often the first victim of the mule's rampage. In many tales, the newly transformed beast will gallop first to the priest's home, trampling him to death before beginning its wider, mindless journey. His sin brings forth the monster that becomes his own executioner. The legend thus served to reinforce the sanctity of the clergy, reminding them that they too were subject to God's wrath, and that their transgressions could unleash literal demons upon their community. Beyond its function as a tool of moral enforcement, the legend also served to explain the unexplainable. In these small, isolated communities, surrounded by a vast and dangerous wilderness, life was precarious. A farmer might awaken to find his prize bull dead in the field, its body mysteriously bruised and broken.
A traveler might vanish on the road between towns, leaving behind nothing but a few scattered belongings. A strange fire might break out in a cane field in the middle of the night. In a world without forensics or modern science, the Headless Mule provided a convenient and terrifying explanation. It was a single, supernatural cause for 1,000 different calamities. This attribution of mundane tragedy to a monstrous entity only fed the legend, making it feel more real, more present, and more powerful with each telling. The story was not static. It was a living, breathing piece of folklore that adapted to the regions where it was told. In the cattle-ranching plains of the South, the mule was said to be even larger and more violent, its hooves capable of shattering stone. In the coastal regions, its bray was sometimes said to be mistaken for the sound of the ocean waves during a storm. In some versions, the sin is not specifically love with a priest, but any number of profound transgressions. A goddaughter who has relations with her godfather, a daughter who curses her own mother. The core of the curse remained the same, a woman's sin leading to a monstrous transformation. But the details shifted, allowing the story to resonate with the specific fears and moral anxieties of each unique community. This adaptability is the hallmark of a powerful myth. It endured because it was useful, a framework for understanding a world that was often violent, unpredictable, and frightening. It gave a name to the darkness that lay just beyond the edge of town, and it provided a clear, if brutal, set of rules for keeping that darkness at bay. Obey, conform, suppress your desires, and you will be safe. Transgress, and you risk becoming the very monster that haunts your neighbor's nightmares. The legend was not just a story being told, it was a story being lived, its presence felt every time a lone hoofbeat echoed in the dead of night. But what if the legend was more than just a story? What if, buried in the forgotten records of colonial Brazil, there are clues that point to a real woman, a real priest, and a real tragedy that gave birth to the phantom in flames? The search for a single, verifiable origin of a folktale is like chasing a ghost through a hall of mirrors. You will find endless reflections, distorted echoes, and tantalizing clues, but rarely a single solid form. Legends like the Headless Mule are not born from a single incident. They are woven from the threads of 1,000 older stories, colored by the unique fears and beliefs of the culture that claims them. To unmask this creature, we must first trace these threads back through time, back to the old world superstitions that crossed the Atlantic in the holds of Portuguese caravels. The concept of a human being transformed into a beast as punishment for a moral or spiritual failing is an idea as old as storytelling itself. In the myths of ancient Greece, the gods of Olympus frequently used metamorphosis as their preferred tool for retribution. When King Lycon of Arcadia dared to test the omniscience of Zeus by serving him the flesh of his own son, he was not merely struck down. Zeus cursed him to become the very beast whose savagery he had emulated. He became the first werewolf, a man trapped in the form of a wolf, forever driven by a hunger he could never sate. This was not just a punishment, it was a poetic and horrifying reflection of his inner monstrosity made external. Similarly, the weaver Arachne, whose pride in her craft led her to challenge the goddess Athena to a contest, was transformed into the first spider, cursed to weave her webs for eternity. Her gift became her prison. This theme repeats itself across mythologies. A sin of hubris, sacrilege, or forbidden passion results not in a clean death,
but in an eternal, living punishment, where the transgressor's very form becomes the symbol of their crime. The headless mule fits perfectly within this ancient and terrifying tradition. Her curse is not random. It is a meticulously crafted theological statement, a physical manifestation of her sin. But the general theme of transformation is only one thread. The other, more specific thread is that of the phantom rider and the spectral force. The horse has for millennia occupied a unique space in the human psyche. It is a symbol of power, of freedom, of untamed nature brought under human control. But it is also a psychopomp, a creature that travels between worlds, guiding the souls of the dead. From the magnificent Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged steed that could gallop to the land of the dead, to the pale horse of the apocalypse, whose rider is death, the horse has always been a bridge to the supernatural. It is no surprise, then, that many of Europe's most terrifying phantoms are equestrian. We have already spoken of the Dullahan and the Headless Horseman, but they are part of a larger, even more terrifying tradition, the Wild Hunt. Across northern and western Europe, from Germany to Scandinavia to England, tales were told of a spectral hunting party that thundered across the night sky. Led by a fearsome figure, sometimes the god Odin, sometimes a damned soul, sometimes the devil himself. This cavalcade of ghostly hunters and howling hounds would sweep across the land, a harbinger of plague, war, and death. To witness the wild hunt was to risk being swept up in it, your soul lost forever. The sound of their coming, the galloping of hooves, the baying of hounds, the blast of a hunting horn, was a sound of pure supernatural dread. These stories cemented the image of the phantom rider as an omen of doom. They took the familiar, comforting sound of a horse's gallop and twisted it into a promise of terror. The headless mule is a direct descendant of this tradition. Her rampage is a form of solitary wild hunt. Her bray, the cry of the spectral hounds. Her purpose not to hunt, but to flee from an internal torment. However, the most direct ancestor of the Brazilian monster can be found in the sun-scorched mountains of the Iberian Peninsula, specifically in the folklore of Catalonia. Here, they tell stories of the muladona, the woman mule. The parallels are uncanny and undeniable. The muladona is a young woman who, for a grave sin, often sacrilege or heresy, is cursed to transform into a mule. Every night she endures the painful metamorphosis and is forced to gallop from midnight to dawn, climbing the steepest and most treacherous mountains. The legend states that she must climb one mountain for every day of the year.
Like her Brazilian counterpart, she is shod in iron, and her journey is one of endless, agonizing toil. The sound of her iron hooves clattering on the mountain stones is a sound of ill omen. The Catalan legend, while not featuring the Pillar of Fire, provides the core narrative structure: a woman's sin, a transformation into a mule, and a nightly, torturous pilgrimage. When Portuguese colonists left their homeland for Brazil, they did not just carry tools and weapons, they carried these stories in their minds. The tale of a woman cursed to become a mule was already part of their cultural DNA. But a myth does not survive a transatlantic journey unchanged. In the unique cultural crucible of colonial Brazil, this Iberian legend was reforged, becoming darker, stranger, and infinitely more terrifying. It absorbed the anxieties and beliefs of its new environment, a process of syncretism that created a truly Brazilian monster. One of the most powerful influences came from the millions of enslaved Africans who were brought to Brazil to work the mines and plantations. They carried with them their own complex and powerful religious traditions, particularly from the Yoruba, Fon, and Bantu peoples of West and Central Africa. These belief systems were rich with concepts of metamorphosis, spirit possession, and divine retribution. The Orishas, Voduns, and Nkisi were not distant, abstract deities. They were powerful, immanent forces that could directly interfere in the lives of mortals, possessing their followers and punishing those who broke their laws. While there may not have been a direct one-to-one equivalent of a headless mule, the underlying principles resonated powerfully. The idea that a spiritual transgression could have a direct, physical, and often monstrous consequence was a familiar concept. The notion of a human body becoming a vessel for a powerful, often uncontrollable force, aligned with traditions of spirit possession. As African and Catholic beliefs began to intertwine, the European story of a cursed woman was imbued with a new layer of visceral, spiritual intensity. Simultaneously, the land itself was a source of supernatural belief. The indigenous peoples of Brazil, like the Tupi and Guarani, lived in a world that was profoundly animistic. For them, the jungle was not just a collection of trees and animals. It was a living, breathing entity, populated by a vast array of powerful spirits. There was Unhanga, a malevolent spirit of the underworld who could take many forms to deceive and harm humans. There was the Curupira, the protector of the forest with backward-facing feet. These were not just stories. They were fundamental truths about the world. For the Portuguese colonists, isolated and surrounded by this vast, untamed wilderness, the jungle was already a place of immense psychological dread. It was the other, the unknown. The animistic beliefs of the indigenous peoples, even when suppressed by the church, seeped into the local consciousness, reinforcing the idea that the natural world was a place of profound supernatural danger, a place where monsters were real. The Headless Mule, therefore, is a syncretic masterpiece of horror. It is born from the rigid Catholic guilt of Portugal, which provides the central sin and punishment. It inherits its narrative structure from older Iberian folktales like the Muladona. It is then infused with the visceral spiritual intensity of African traditions and set loose in the haunted, animistic landscape of the Brazilian imagination. This is why the legend became so powerful. It spoke to all layers of this new, stratified society, reflecting the anxieties of each group. This cultural fusion explains how the legend was created, but its survival and spread was fueled by something far more tangible: collective hysteria and the brutal realities of colonial life. While it is highly unlikely that a woman ever physically transformed into a fiery-necked mule, the social conditions of the time were perfectly suited to create evidence that seemed to confirm the legend's truth. Consider the nature of these colonial towns. They were small, insular, and rife with gossip and suspicion. The church wielded immense power, and public reputation was a matter of social survival. Now imagine a real-world scandal. A priest, a figure of immense authority, is discovered to have been having an affair. The woman involved would be instantly ostracized, branded a sinner of the highest order. She would be publicly shamed, perhaps even physically punished by the community or exiled. In such a charged atmosphere, fueled by fervent religious belief and pre-existing superstitions, how would the community process such an event? It is not a great leap to imagine gossip turning into legend. The shamed woman, disappearing from public life, isn't just in hiding. The whispers would say she is enduring her penance. The strange sound heard in the night isn't just a stray animal. It is her in her cursed form. The dead livestock, the trampled crops, all become proof of her nightly rampage. The legend provided a supernatural framework for a very real social drama, transforming a human tragedy into a terrifying morality play. The woman at the center of the scandal becomes the physical embodiment of the myth, a living cautionary tale. Her social death is interpreted as a supernatural transformation. Furthermore, the accusation itself could be a weapon. In a society so steeped in fear, a mere accusation of sacrilegious behavior could be enough to ruin a woman. The Headless Mule was the ultimate boogeyman, and the threat of being associated with the legend was a powerful tool for enforcing social control and settling personal vendettas. This pattern is not unique. It echoes the social dynamics of the European and American witch trials, where collective fear and superstition were manipulated to persecute, ostracize, and execute those who fell outside the social norm. The Mula Sem Cabeza can be seen as a form of slow-motion witch hunt, where the punishment was not execution, but a living damnation enacted through social death and storytelling. The legend, therefore, operated on two levels. It was a grand theological horror story about sin and divine retribution, but it was also a reflection of the grim, earthbound realities of colonial life, a way to process scandal, explain misfortune, and enforce a brutal social order. The monster was not just a product of imagination, it was a product of the society itself, a phantom built from the bricks of its faith, its fears, and its own injustices.
It galloped out of the realm of pure folklore and into the lived experience of the people, its hooves echoing in the space between whispered gossip and absolute belief. But the colonial era ended, the gold rush faded, Brazil grew, modernized, and became a nation of sprawling cities and scientific thought. Yet the story of the Headless Mule did not die. It refused to be relegated to the dusty pages of history books. It survived, clinging to the rural heartlands, its legend passed down from generation to generation. It evolved, adapting its terror to a world that was no longer so certain about sin and damnation. The creature of colonial guilt became a creature of the modern night. But what happens when this phantom of the past gallops into the skeptical present? The encounters did not stop. They merely changed, becoming rarer, stranger, and in some ways, even more terrifying. What deeper psychological truth does the Headless Mule hold for us now, in an age that claims to have banished such monsters to the realm of fantasy? As the fires of the gold rush cooled and the rigid piety of the colonial era gave way to new centuries of progress, revolution, and reason, one might expect a creature like the Headless Mule to fade away. In a world of gas lamps, telegraphs, and eventually electricity, what place is there for a phantom born of religious guilt? But the mule did not vanish. It retreated. It receded from the growing cities, finding refuge in the deep interior of Brazil, in the small towns and rural communities where the nights were still truly dark and the old stories were still whispered like prayers. The legend survived because its core function, while rooted in colonial Catholicism, tapped into a fear far more ancient than any single religion.
the fear of our own nature. The terror of the headless mule is not simply the fear of a monster. It is the fear of the monster that lies dormant within the self. It is the anxiety that our passions, our desires, and our secrets could one day erupt and consume us, erasing our identity and turning us into something unrecognizable. This fear does not require a belief in damnation. It only requires understanding guilt. And so the encounters continued. They became rarer, more fragmented, but they did not stop. The lone traveler on a mule train was replaced by the truck driver, pushing his heavy vehicle through the night on a lonely stretch of asphalt cutting through the heart of the country. Today, in the rural corners of Brazil, these stories are still told. Talk to a trucker who has driven the desolate BR-319 through the Amazon or the winding mountain roads of the Serra do Espinhaço at night, and you might hear a modern version of Afonso's tale. The story often begins the same way: an unnatural silence. The radio crackles with static before dying completely. The truck's powerful headlights flicker, then dim, as if the battery is being drained by some unseen force. And then the sound. The frantic galloping, impossibly fast, keeping pace with the speeding vehicle just beyond the tree line. Drivers describe a flicker of light in their side mirrors, a frantic, dancing flame that seems to float in the darkness. They grip the wheel, their knuckles white, pressing the accelerator to the floor, the logical part of their brain screaming that it's just a reflection, a trick of the tired mind. But then the thing pulls alongside them. For a terrifying moment, it matches their speed. A headless beast wreathed in fire, running on the shoulder of the road, its iron hooves striking sparks against the asphalt. It is a vision from another time, a collision of the ancient and the modern. And then, as quickly as it appeared, it veers off into the darkness, its agonized bray momentarily rising above the roar of the engine. The driver is left alone on the empty highway, the radio crackling back to life, the headlights returning to full power, with a story that no one in the brightly lit cities will ever believe. The legend also thrives in the liminal spaces between youth and adulthood. In small towns, teenagers, fueled by bravado and a desire to test the boundaries of their world, still dare each other to visit the places the mule is said to haunt. The ruins of an old colonial church, a crumbling cemetery on the edge of town, or the specific crossroads where a priest was said to have been trampled to death centuries ago. They go out on a Thursday night, armed with flashlights and smartphones, their nervous laughter echoing in the darkness. They wait. Usually, nothing happens. The night remains quiet, and they return home emboldened, the legend a little less real than before. But sometimes the story is different. Sometimes a cold wind will sweep through the clearing, extinguishing their flashlights. A smell of sulfur will fill the air, and in the distance they will hear it. The galloping. Panic erupts. They scramble, they run, falling over each other in the dark, the sound growing louder, closer. They don't see the creature clearly. They see a flicker of fire through the trees, a monstrous silhouette against the moon. They flee, not stopping until they are back in the safety of the town's streetlights, their hearts pounding, their bravado shattered. They return with a new respect for the old stories, having felt the cold touch of a fear they cannot explain, a fear that their phones could not capture.
These modern encounters, whether real or imagined, serve a vital purpose. They keep the legend alive. They demonstrate that the Headless Mule is not a relic of the past, but an eternal presence. It has adapted. It is no longer just a symbol of religious sin, but a manifestation of a deeper, more modern anxiety. In an age where our identities are curated, displayed, and constantly judged online, what is more terrifying than the idea of losing control so completely that your very identity is violently erased? The fire that replaces the mule's head is the ultimate loss of self, a public branding of an inner failure, a shame made manifest for all the world to see. The Headless Mule, then, is the physical embodiment of a psychological schism. It is the violent separation of the mind from the body. The body, the vessel of desire and instinct, is transformed into a beast driven by mindless, agonizing impulse. The mind, the seat of reason, morality, and identity, is annihilated by fire. This is the legend's enduring power. It speaks to the eternal conflict within us, the battle between our primal instincts and our rational, social selves.
The curse is a warning that if that balance is lost, if we allow our forbidden desires to overwhelm our reason, the result is not freedom, but a monstrous form of enslavement. This is why the creature is a mule and not a horse. A horse is a symbol of wild, untamed spirit. A mule is a symbol of sterile, unending labor. The punishment for a sin of unbridled passion is to be transformed into a creature incapable of passion, capable only of suffering and toil. It is a chillingly precise form of poetic justice. The curse does not just punish, it mocks. Ultimately, the Headless Mule is a far more complex and disturbing entity than its more famous headless cousins. The Dullahan is a servant of death. The Headless Horseman is a ghost of war. They are external threats, monsters from the outside. The Headless Mule is a monster from within. She is a reminder that the most terrifying curses are not those cast upon us by gods or demons, but those we invite upon ourselves through our own actions. She is a symbol of the horrifying truth that we can, through our own failings, become our own monster, our own ghost, our own damnation. The legend persists in the shadows of the modern world because it speaks to a fundamental human truth. We are all, in some way, haunted. We are haunted by our pasts, by our mistakes, by the things we desire but cannot have, by the people we fear we might become. The Headless Mule is the ultimate manifestation of that haunting. She is a galloping, burning effigy of guilt and consequence. So, the next time you find yourself on a lonely road late at night, and you hear a sound that does not belong, a frantic galloping where there should be silence, ask yourself what it represents. Is it merely a creature of forgotten folklore, a relic of a superstitious past? Or is it something more? Is it a symbol of a timeless fear, the terrifying echo of a story that has been told for centuries in countless forms, because it speaks to the darkness that lies not in the woods, but within the human heart itself? The fire that replaces her head is a warning. It is a judgment. And it is a mirror. For the terrifying truth behind this religious curse is that it was never just about a woman and a priest. It was always about us. It was always about the terrifying possibility that for some sins, there is no forgiveness. Only the fire and the endless, agonizing gallop through the night. The Headless Mule is but one of the many terrifying entities born from the unique cultural landscape of Brazil. It is a land whose folklore is as deep, dark, and untamed as the Amazon jungle itself. While the mule was forged in the crucible of colonial guilt, other, older things lurk in the shadows. Creatures born from a fear of the earth itself. Join us next time as we travel deeper into the darkness to unearth the chilling truth behind the creature known as the corpo seco, the withered corpse. A man so evil, the very ground refuses to claim his body.